takes us into the early 1900s. And you're starting to see the beginnings of an industrial revolution. The World War is going on and it's dragging down the economy. But what happens is Henry Ford comes up with a Ford and he actually perfects the assembly line. And in 1914, he does something that absolutely sent shockwaves throughout capitalism and big business. He doubled the workers' wages to $5 a day, and that was for a 9-hour day. First of all, prior to that, everyone was fighting against 15-hour days and 16-hour days and child labor and all that. So the 9-hour day was monumental as it was. But to double their wages, and everyone was like, what are you doing? What's going on? Well, he doubled his profit in a 2-year period. That's really when people started waking up and saying, hey, maybe there is something to making workers happier, making wages attainable. So after that, we get into the 20s, the Roaring 20s. That's the industrial age of America. And this is when the politics comes in. We talked about at the beginning of this video, we were going to bring politics into it at some point, and you can't help but bring politics into this discussion. In the 20s, things were going great. Everybody was working. The Roaring 20s, the industrial age, was at full bloom, and there was tons of money. So the banks were sitting there, and the banking rule at the time was for every dollar that was deposited, you had to have $2 to back it up, whether it's the gold standard or in deposits or whatnot. So somewhere along there in the 20s, a banker decided that, hey, we get this deposit money and we're backing it up times 2. Well, this money's just sitting there. Why can't we make money on this money as well? So then banks started opening up right next door to their bank. They opened up an investment firm and they were investing the money that the people deposited. Okay. Then right next door to that, they opened up insurance companies that insured these investments and other things. 1929 brings us to the crash. And what happened was the stock market crash. There was no money to be had. Everybody, you younger folks, I don't know if you've ever heard about the run on banks. Well, that was it. People panicked with the stock market crash, and they all went to the banks to get their money before it was gone. And there was no money when they got there. The money was gone already. It was too late. So they took the money that they were supposed to be backing the deposits with and invested it. And they lost it. So then Americans had no money. So imagine, if you will, right now, working, saving, and on Monday morning, you roll into the bank to take your money out, and the bank tells you that there's no money to give you. Or worse, the bank's not even open because they know what's coming. Okay, that's what started the Great Depression, the gambling with stocks and people's money. And then that brings us into probably the best time for labor and the working class in America, the era that would follow the Great Depression. In 1932, somewhere along in here, there is an act written by the government, by the Senate. It was a Glass-Steagall Act. And basically, what it did was put regulations on banks. So it said, you can be a bank. You guys want to be a bank? That's great. If you want to be an insurance firm, that's great too. If you want to be an investment firm, you can do that too. However, you cannot be a bank and be an investment firm or be an insurance firm. If you want to be a bank, you have to be just a bank, okay? And at that point, it set regulations on what banks could do with money and the risks that they could take with your money. Now remember that, the Glass-Steagall Act, because we're going to come back to it later on in this timeline. 1935, huge, the watershed era for labor in America. The Wagner Act, or the National Labor Relations Act, was undertaken in 1935, which formed the National Labor Relations Board, who monitors employer-employee relations. And the feds got involved. The big deal about this was all backed by the federal government, the Wagner Act and the feds, and they were putting rules and regulations. At this point in time, this is when union membership soared, because the American public now had confidence in unions because the feds were involved, and they all have memories of the feds sending in troops and people dying all the way up to this point and every major strike. So now that the feds were backing it and everything was cool and there were rules in place and employees had rights, that's all that the American public needed, and union membership absolutely soared.